Chapter 18. Did you get some money? I opened my purse and showed Thomas. He slowed the car to gawk at the mound of hundreds I dropped into my bag. Then he accelerated, as if he had gotten a boost. What do you think? Now take me where I can rent a boat. Don't tell me we're going to relax now and have a little fun. I've never been on a boat. I glanced at Thomas. He settled into this friendship thing fast. I hope you don't get seasick because it wouldn't be nice if we both got sick. I didn't want to tell him my plans yet. Tell me you know how to steer a boat, Thomas said. Tell me it's not your first time doing this. My eyes wavered in his direction, and I shot him a closed smile. It can't be hard. Just like driving a car. I've never seen you drive a car. I know how, I just couldn't afford one until now. You're looking at the future Mrs. Mieres. Thomas slowed his car and pulled off the interstate and brought the car to an abrupt stop. He glared at me and stood silent. I want you out of here now. Forget the gas money, forget our friendship, and forget you know me because you have lost your mind. When a woman proudly announces that she's going to marry a man after knowing him barely a week, I can understand that. We have arranged marriages in my country, but when she says that she's going to marry a vampire, that's a complete horse of a different color. He's not human anymore, Dakota. Get that into your young mind. I know. Maybe I'm not into humans. Maybe I'm into something different. Who says you have to marry a human when there are other choices in the world? Now drive. Thomas reluctantly pulled into traffic. Take off that emergency flashing sign. We don't want to get pulled over. And drive a little faster. My mother drives faster than you. After reaching the speed limit, Thomas didn't talk to me. He glanced over a few times and headed to the marina. As we neared the place to rent a boat, he said, "Marrying a vampire is a choice few people are willing to make. Who marries a dead person anyway?" He's not dead. Technically he would be considered dead, but I've been around some men who watch television all day, sleep, play video games, and do nothing else. My father came to mind. Wouldn't you think they're dead? Ashton works very hard at night and sleeps during the day, and he's trying to discover a cure for vampires and humans who have been infected by vampires. There would be no need for a cure if he and his kind hadn't spread that disease. People are dying in their sleep, and the doctors in charge are overlooking the cause because they don't want to see what's in front of them. They don't want to believe that vampires exist. They would blame it on bats. That's what happened in my country until your birth father pointed that out, and that's why Morgan Mieres killed him. Thomas reluctantly drove me to a marina where I rented a boat for a week. It didn't take much to convince the owner, and he agreed to ferry us to Morgan's Island north of Seattle. The captain agreed to wait on the boat while we hiked on the other part of the island. We wouldn't tell him what our real intentions were because of the apparent problems. We hadn't planned this well because it was evening when we reached the island and swam to the shore. I had carefully packed my vampire kit, and with the assurance of a child who didn't know her limitations. I proceeded with Thomas, who was nervous the entire time. He was probably the only one who made sense. And he did know how to swim, even if he tried to pretend he didn't. "We aren't equipped to do this," he said, jumping into the water. I leapt after him from the boat. We were both strong swimmers and reached the bank quickly. Changing into dry clothes we carried in a watertight bag, I looked around trying to gauge where we were. I have all the equipment I need. I'm ready for whatever comes my way, and Ashton promised me that when he wakes, he will be here to protect me. What happens if he's late? And what about me? That's why you're here and have my back. I have no one's back. I don't know why I'm here. Revenge. What about all the young children that perished in your country at the hands of Morgan Mieres? Thomas stopped protesting and depressing me with his talk. I was on the verge of turning back, thinking about the enormity of the task ahead, and I didn't need Thomas' squeamish behavior. I had to find Paige and let her know that someone cared about her. That I cared. We have to get to the house before nightfall. That's when they wake. Where's the map? What map? GPS, I don't care. Something to tell us where the house is located, Thomas said, glaring at me. We were trudging through high grass and mud, and then I stopped. I was in a hurry and keen on finding Paige and killing Morgan that I forgot to get the location from Ashton. So you don't know if we are on the right side of the island or not? Something like that? I thought you were a scholar. I am, but not a navigational scholar. And you lack the ability to think, he said in a sarcastic tone. Let's not get nasty, Thomas. If we're at each other's throats, then we could get killed in this. I looked around, and all I saw was trees and high grass. Jungle. We don't have to worry about being at each other's throats. When the sun sets, the vampires will be at our throats. If it makes you feel better, and we haven't found the house by twilight, then we'll turn back and stay on the boat until the sun rises. Before then, Ashton should be here to help us. Or to kill me or make you one like him. I rolled my eyes at him, and continued stomping through the grass and walking over rocks. I strode quickly ahead of Thomas because of his bitching. But I could understand. I was too stupid and young to know that I was in serious trouble because of the time. Experience and being frightened about what lurks out in this vast world had Thomas hysterical with fright and made more sense than me. As we trudged along with me leading the way, make-believing I knew where we were going, I didn't have a clue, but I didn't want Thomas to think that I couldn't handle this. After all, I had gotten him in this shit, and we were knee-deep in it. When I looked down, it wasn't shit we were knee-deep in, it was thick, dark mud, which made our trek more difficult and slow. The sun is going down. I think we should get back to the boat, Thomas said to me. Which way? I stood looking around. I didn't pay attention to where we had come from. I turned around in a circle. Don't tell me. You don't know, Thomas said to me. I was too busy answering your questions, and we were talking. I'm not the only one on this outing. Is that what you call this, an outing? It's a fucking death march. Stop hollering, Thomas. Someone will hear you. The only ones likely to hear us, if they haven't already, are those vampires, and after this, I would welcome someone to put me out of my misery. Don't talk like that, Thomas. I'll get you out of here. I put my arms around him, and we glanced at each other with fear in our eyes. We saw the sunset and the darkness surround us. Isn't it strange that there are no animals? It's a wooded area. You would think you would hear bugs of some kind and birds. There are birds everywhere. But here there are no birds, he said, his voice unsteady. I stopped walking and listened. You're right. There are no sounds of birds or wolves or anything. That's because that family you're marrying into have killed whatever is alive on this island. And in the silence, we heard a burst of screaming of young women coming in our direction. The sounds they made were eerie and heart-stopping. They were calling out for their mothers and praying. It was as if they were being chased, and they were. The sound of stomping and shouting were at a high-pitched level like doves crying. These were the cries of young women, and it was more than two from the sound of the beating of the bushes facing us. Hi, Thomas. Something is chasing them. We don't need to be trampled. We both rushed for a tree, and because of the adrenaline pumping from fright, we each found a tree and climbed it without any trouble. When we looked down, 10 women were rushing through the bushes in what looked more like sleeping gowns. We couldn't see what was chasing them, and we almost climbed down, but then it became clear who was pursuing them. Swirling about a black cloud behind them, and standing in a clearing looking handsome and deadly, stood Morgan. He glanced around, his head in the air as if searching for a scent, and then rushed behind that group of young women. He was on a hunt. The most deadly of animals. More deadly than any man, because he was more than a man, he was an immortal who couldn't be killed in the usual way. When we thought he had gone, we climbed down. I searched for my satchel. Maybe I could do what no one else managed to do. Perhaps I could do a little damage, as I had done with a pencil. Before I saw Morgan place his hand over his heart and grimace. He was still feeling the plunge of that pencil. Looking down, I saw my shoulder bag setting behind the tree. I had thought about myself, and not what could free us from this hell we found ourselves thrust into. I glanced over to Thomas, and he had cowered behind a group of leaves. Morgan wasn't interested in us. Not yet. He behaved as if we weren't around. Maybe the wind wasn't sending my scent in his direction, or he didn't think we were a threat to him, or perhaps the thought of fresh blood aroused his predatory instincts. Nevertheless, I wasn't sure how long we could hold on. When my eyes wandered in Thomas's direction, we heard a chilling scream and then nothing. This went on every few minutes with the sound of a different girl in a distance, until there existed an unnatural silence. The silence of death held us in one spot. We grabbed each other. We were afraid to move, but we needed to in order to survive the night. Chapter 19. The smell of fresh blood and the putrid stink of old blood filled the air, and the overcast skies threatened rain. It was a threat I welcomed. We stepped weak-legged into the marsh far from the ocean where the tall grass and blood-stained water pooled. Turning to see what was underfoot, my boot caught on something. Bending to remove it, I jumped back. Then I saw something that made me want to vomit. We were treading through a killing ground. 2 bodies lay at my feet. Their eyes were open as they lay partially nude, their beautiful gowns ripped, and gashes that look a lot like long claws shone its signs on the female's breasts to their midsection. And on their necks, large puncture marks appeared to be pounded into them over and over. Thomas stood startled with his hands to his mouth, unable to speak, or he couldn't find the word for what he saw. Whoever or whatever fed on them had an insatiable appetite, because everywhere there appeared to be marks of large incisors. The one body at Thomas's feet was chalk white and shriveled, and drained of every ounce of blood. This wasn't the act of turning these women into vampires. Maybe they didn't need any. It was the act of uncontrolled greed. Everywhere we strode, the look and smell of death surrounded us. We were stepping on one body after the next. When Thomas saw the girls and the realization that it was only time before we were next, and the picture in his mind of him lying with his throat torn apart, he began running and I dashed after him. "Stop, Thomas. They can hear you. Don't run." He must have been tired, and in 1 second he stopped where he stood. His chest was heaving up and down. His skin pale from sweat. Running through the tall grass, I heard the sound of water at a distance. If we can get to the ocean, maybe we can have a chance to swim away. At night? What is wrong now? You can swim, Thomas? I can swim, but not in the ocean at night. It's a completely different thing. During the day, I can see if something is approaching, but at night, and you don't know how far we would have to swim to get back to the boat. We stood still listening for sounds, not hearing anything moving. Are they toying with us? Are the vampires treating us like mice and they're the cats? We stood huddled together in the chilly night, shivering, not from cold, but from the heat of fear. I don't know. Morgan knows I'm here, and for some reason, he allowed the others to have the women, and he's keeping me to himself. He saw me hiding in the tree. I know he did. I'm not sure if he knows anyone is with me. If he gets me, then maybe you can get word to Ashton if he takes me away. Thomas glared at me. He probably smelled me. But I don't know why he didn't take both of us. He doesn't want me. And maybe he thinks it wouldn't be good for his image if he let you see how he treats your friends. Thomas tried to make light of the situation, but he was quaking as he held on to me. If we can last until the morning, maybe I can swim to the boat. You should be able to do that, right? Hide someplace until I bring back a dinghy. It's on the other side of the island, Dakota. You're not leaving me here alone. There must be another way out of here? He looked around at the mountains, rocks, trees, vegetation, and marshland. If there is, then tell me where, Thomas. I turned to the left and then the right. This is an island. There is no way off this place. We have to get to the other side where the boat is anchored. I pulled his reluctant hand and began walking in the opposite direction. It will take forever, Thomas said, his breath shallow. Do we have a choice? After walking for an hour, tramping through marshes and high grass, we were back where we started. We've been walking in a circle, Dakota, Thomas said, his voice rising a pitch. With the rain and the clouds, I can't see the stars. Stop whining, Thomas, and keep your voice down. I should be complaining. The good thing. He cut me off. There is nothing good about this. We're wet and full of mud, and we could die. What is good about that? I was saying, the good thing is the sun will rise in a few hours and we can see. The vampires will be sleeping. If we can last those 2 hours. And then we heard the scream of a girl, and then silence. The shrill of her small voice unnerved me. I panicked and grabbed Thomas, and we hugged each other and looked around, but gathered our courage and kept trudging along with weeping and cries coming from somewhere behind us. Promise me, Dakota, that you will kill me if they get me and I turn into one of those creatures. I'm a vegan. I don't eat meat and anything that has blood in it. He shivered at the idea of consuming human blood. It won't come to that. I didn't know what I was saying, but I said it nonetheless because Thomas thought I could indeed kill a vampire. He thought I had all the answers, and I had better if we planned to survive this. I'm tired, Thomas said to me. If you can stand sleeping in this marsh. Don't ask me. We have no choice, Thomas, I whispered to him, too mindful that someone knew our every move and was probably hearing our conversation. If we're lying among the dead, maybe they can't smell us. I pulled Thomas down into the damp high grass, reeking of bloody bodies. We lay together in the bleak and black overcast sky, praying for light. I didn't know how long we had been lying on the wet, blood-stained grass, but it wasn't long enough. How could anyone sleep when every breath we inhale smelled of rotting bodies? The heavy sky was dark with clouds, but there was a sliver of moonlight cutting through a thin haze and landing on me. Thomas was sleeping with his head on my shoulder, and my head, packed with mud from the fields, lay on a pile of thick grass. The stench of death walled us in, and I woke. I can't breathe, and if I open my mouth, I'm taking in the putrid, rotting smell. I can't go back to sleep. We have to leave this place. For one, it's not healthy, and another, I'm a night person. That was something I didn't realize until I had to work for Ashton. Ashton, I whispered his name. He should realize by now that I'm not coming back. Why hasn't he come for me? He must know that something has happened to me. I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. I've accepted that he's a vampire, and at my age, I'm not easy to get along with, but I wouldn't desert him the way he has abandoned me. What's the point of being in love with a vampire if he can't protect you from the other soul-fucking, blood-sucking vampires? Turning and twisting my shoulder was difficult. I glanced over at Thomas sleeping soundly. How can he do that lying in mud, almost covering his face? I push Thomas off, and his body goes splash into the murky, blood-stained water. Wake up, I whisper. I push him a second time. Don't let him be dead, I murmur. No one can sleep that hard. I breathe hard, and anxiety flows through me thinking about the possibilities of being alone out here. He's not dead, but he will be. The voice coming from someone standing over me is shallow, but menacing. I jerked my head to the side, and I'm afraid to raise my eyes. I cringed and hunched my body into a fetal position. I was scared. I've never been this afraid of anything, but who wouldn't, with vampires floating around and feeding on young innocent girls? Who am I to think that I'm special? Maybe Morgan sent him to bring me back. If I hadn't fallen asleep, I wouldn't be here, and that thing wouldn't be ready to kill me and Thomas. I glance down at Black Shoes, and I follow up to the face. It's over. I'm dead, and thank God Thomas is sleeping. At least he won't be aware of what is coming next. I blink twice. In the sliver of the moonlight, I recognize that white blonde hair. Elliot? I recognize the face, but it appeared more mature than when I last saw him. Now he's wearing the look of a matured man. His features are hard, his eyes focused, and his body is muscular. He's all in black, and his eyes are deep set with dark circles. He's not as thin as he once were. Elliot. I call his name again, because he doesn't appear to know his name. Elliot, I haven't seen you since we graduated. How the fuck are you, my friend? His head turned in a quick, jerky manner. He stared down and then up and out into the marsh, as if he thought I was talking to someone else. It's me, Elliot. Dakota. You know, the one that was in the mental hospital with you. The one you told your deep dark secrets to. That you knew that vampires were visiting you at night and cutting and sucking your blood. Remember, Elliot? He scratched his head and slanted it to the right. His forehead creased and then smoothed. You were right, Elliot. I'm living proof that they exist. We can go back and tell everyone. Vampires do exist. I stood without Elliot's help with Thomas still asleep near me. Once I faced Elliot, he hissed at me. I moved back. I had invaded his personal space, and he didn't like that. I get it. I get like that sometimes, but something was wrong with Elliot, and with all the excitement and scary shit, it didn't dawn on me what was wrong with him. Morgan said that I could feed on anyone alive on this island, except Dakota. You belong to him. He has plans for you. His voice sounded cold and impersonal. Not like the quirky, warm Elliot in high school. Don't you know me, Elliot? What's wrong with you? I moved to touch him, and he leaned away. I'd run away from me too. Mud in my hair laced with blood in the stink. Then Elliot crouched on the ground over Thomas. What are you doing, Elliot? Can't you see? If I can't feed on you, I have to find someone else. I touched his shoulder, and he turned his head almost around and nipped at my fingers like a young dog looking for attention. His eyes changed colors, and he acted like a dog who was disturbed during his meal. You're one of them. What happened, Elliot? Still crouching over Thomas, he was determined to feed on him. I needed to keep him talking to distract him, and maybe, just maybe, Thomas would wake up and run or do something. Lately, he's been useless. Dakota? Dakota. Elliot called my name and looked up at me, trying to remember me. Dakota, I fell asleep one night and didn't take my meds. I was tired of the medication and fighting to remain human. For what? For my parents to place me in the hospital each time they want to go to Europe, because they didn't want to be bothered with me. I gave up, and when that female vampire visited me in the hospital, I gave in. You were in the hospital when that happened? Morgan's hospital. It was his hospital where I surrendered my body and soul. The female vampire wasn't bad. She turned me, and now I'm her slave, and she lets me feed on humans when she's finished with them. That's disgusting, Elliot. Look at you, pale and like a zombie and a vampire. As I was talking, Thomas unknowingly opened his eyes and turned to face Elliot. Elliot's fangs descended from his mouth, and he leaned into Thomas. Don't do that, Elliot. Don't. I had reached inside my shoulder bag for a silver chain to throw at him. I didn't want to hurt him, but I would if he made one more move at Thomas. The silver would disfigure him, but it wasn't enough to kill him. Elliot was the last one I wanted to kill. I want to kill that female vampire who did this to him and Morgan. Get away from him. I don't want to hurt you, Elliot. You've been hurt enough, and you have more problems now since you've become one of them. He stood and I saw a tear fall on his cheek. You would hurt me, Dakota? I don't want to hurt you, but you were trying to feed on Thomas, and I can't let you do that. He's my friend too. I'm trying to become the vampire Elizabeth expects. She says I'm too young and all I want to do is play and have sex. She was the first woman to make love to me. She seduced him and turned him into a vampire, and that's all he knows. He wants love, and he thinks he will get it from her. When I turned to Thomas, he had crept up and out of the bog and was hiding behind a tree. I can feed on the animals in the forest up that mountain. But Elizabeth won't respect me unless I kill for my food. You can't do that, Elliot. You don't have the heart for it. If I don't, she will chain me in her tower, and when the sun rises, I will be dead. Not if I kill that vampire first. Then what will become of me? You will work for the man I love. He's a vampire, and I can talk to him. He'll hire you with a recommendation from me. But first, you have to help me get out of here. Up to the northeast is a mountain and valley, Elliot said. The waterfall will lead down to a river, and it will flow into the ocean. There is a small boat there, on the other side of this island. I thought I could get away, but it was too late for me. But first, you have to climb that mountain before twilight tomorrow. If you don't, Elizabeth will send out her slaves to get you and return you to Morgan. He turned her, and she's his slave the way I'm hers. I don't think she wants Morgan to have you. That makes two of us. I was still tired, but that wouldn't stop me from getting off that island of death. I hugged Elliot before I left and found Thomas hiding behind a tree. What did you have to talk to that thing about? He's not a thing. He's my friend. Well, he's not my friend, and the way he looked at me, I've seen a better glance at the zoo during feeding time from lions. As we slogged along stumbling over large rocks, I didn't dare to tell him that we had to climb a mountain before twilight tomorrow. I didn't know you worked at the zoo. I've had many careers in my life. A chef, a doctor. What kind of doctor? A veterinarian. We tromped through the tall grass as the sun was rising. Elliot had obviously gone wherever it was that vampires go. I made one mistake. I didn't ask him where they rested during the day. Now Thomas and I needed food and water. If we could scale that mountain and get to the other side, there would be fresh water and maybe fish. Where are we going, Dakota? Now he would ask me. Don't worry, I know where we're going. Yes, I know, but I'd like to know too. He stood still looking at me after raising his voice. The sweat beaded on his forehead as the sun broke through the clouds. We were warm from walking through that dense grassland. If you must know this, we have to get to that mountain. And then what? He questioned, not making a step in the direction of that mountain. I hesitated because I didn't want him freaking out. Then we climb it and get to the other side before twilight. How are we going to do that? I don't know. We have to do it, and do it before the sun goes down. There's a skiff waiting for us. We can use it to get to our boat and get the hell off this cursed island. What about Paige? I had no answers, but I knew that if I died, there was no way I could help her. How do we know that vampire friend of yours isn't baiting us? We don't know. We have to go on faith. Fuck faith and fuck that mountain. Why don't we hunt them the way they're hunting us, and then kill those vampires? Don't you know something about killing them? I looked at him. I didn't have a clue. My time was spent at the research lab trying to get Ashton to notice me, and then falling in love with him, and being overwhelmed at the thought of him being a vampire, and now with Paige missing, I didn't know what to say to Thomas. Then I remembered the book. What I know is in a book, and I haven't had time to read it. I left it on the boat, and now this. I started slogging through the mud. Thomas had the good sense to follow me. We're wasting time talking. I don't know how long it's going to take to get up there and over it. We stood at the base of the mountain and looked up. I've never climbed a mountain before. Look at that thing. Tall grass, trees everywhere, and rocks. I could lose my footing and tumble down with a broken neck, Thomas said to me. Would you rather have a broken neck, or lay in that marsh with your throat torn apart by some blood-sucking demon and your intestines strewn around for the crows and seagulls to pick at them? Watching the look on Thomas's face, I knew I had painted the right picture to get him going. It was a picture that I had seen myself. I had imagined one just like that. Only I didn't think I had the strength to decide on whether I could become the bride of a vampire, or worse, his concubine or death. But before I would allow Morgan to turn me into one of his cold, unfeeling, bloodthirsty concubines, I'd rather die fighting, and I know I would have a chance, and he wouldn't want me once he knew that I would fight him. He would probably have me running for my life with the rest of the young women, and I never could get a chance to marry Ashton. Why am I thinking of marrying Ashton? Isn't he one of them? And where is he? I had occupied my thoughts with Ashton, and we had climbed halfway up the mountain, but it was taking too long. I have to stop, Thomas. I need a rest. Thomas was happy that I suggested the rest. Not knowing the time, it wasn't looking good. We weren't halfway up, and it appeared to be as if it was 5 or 6 in the evening. When the sun set, we would be in trouble, because the island lay further east than west. And this side of the island posed a problem as well. I thought you'd never rest. I sit in a car over 14 hours a day, and drive around. I'm exhausted. He crouched on his hind legs and watched at me. What's the matter now, Dakota? I have good news and bad news. Don't start with that childish crap. Tell me. I'm a big boy. We're not going to make it. He shot up and turned in a circle and then stopped. What do you mean, we're not going to make it? We still have sunlight, he said, raising his voice and pointing upward. Take a good look. I don't know what I'm looking at. The fog and rain and every fucking thing have me confused. Thomas's voice is whiny. I understand his position. I would be freaking out if I hadn't led him into this mess, and since I did, I have to take the lead and show courage. If I'm to get him to follow me, I can't show that I'm afraid. But inside my voice is screaming, someone help me. If you can hear me, Ashton, come and get us? Composing myself, I walk to Thomas, and we automatically hug. I whisper into his ear, there are caves around. We can spend the night in one of those caves and maybe find food. Suppose there are vampires in those caves. The only food supply is us. Then we get a limb and break it off and use the sharp end and take a rock and plunge the limb into their chest. See, that's easy. They won't wake as long as there's sunlight around. You've got it all figured out. Now how can we find that cave you're talking about? Don't be so negative, Thomas. It's in my genes. So sue me. And he tramped up and then gazed around. I think there's one over there in that valley where there's water. He dashed through the thick trees and high grass, and I took off after him. Then he stopped at the slope and pointed down. There it is at the base of that river. There's a waterfall. Not a big one, but it has fresh water, and where there is fresh water, there's fish. Sushi tonight. And he broke into a broad smile. It was great seeing him smile again. Thomas ran and slid down the hill. Be careful. You could fall. And he did. Thomas tumbled down and rolled over and over. When he landed at the base of that hill and at the mouth of the river, he wasn't moving. I scurried after him, and when I turned him over, I could see he was still breathing but in shock. His eyes opened slowly. You are a nuisance to yourself and me? Don't ask to come with me anymore, I said to him. Breathless and smiling, he said, "Fuck you, Dakota. I think I sprang something. Just leave me. I can't go on. You sound like a character out of one of those old movies. I really should leave you, but I won't. Stay here. I'll be back soon." If I'm not asking too much, Dakota, try to make it back before the sun sets. Don't worry. I'm going to find something that can help you stand. And I'll check out that cave before I bring you there. You're not afraid? I was scared shitless. But what could I do now? I had someone who couldn't walk, and we were hungry and needed fresh water and a place to hide for one more night of hell. I made the trek down to the river, and there to my right behind a waterfall, a cave. I sucked in a large breath, but first I lay down on my stomach and cupped a handful of water. I would have to get Thomas to this stream, so the first thing on the agenda was a walking stick. How was I going to find one strong enough where he could put his weight on without it breaking? That was problem number 1. And we needed food. Problem number 2. Lying face down near the stream, I drank more water, and then I discarded my clothes and dropped them into the water. It was cold, but I couldn't think about that. Hungry and staying alive eclipsed being cold. I waded into the water and swam, and then I caught a fish. The fish were swimming around me in large schools. With schools that large, there couldn't have been many predators to eliminate their numbers. I could reach out and grab a small fish swimming by. Things were beginning to look promising. I brought the fish to the surface and to the bank of the stream, and crouched down to gather my clothing when I felt the sound of loud breathing behind me. It was some kind of large animal, and I closed my eyes because I wanted it to be over quickly. My life didn't flash before my eyes. I didn't think about Ashton, I didn't think about anything or anyone. When nothing happened, I opened my eyes, and in the clear water, I saw the image of something that left me startled. "Don't run. I'm not going to attack you," the voice said. "How is it you can talk? I'm not what I appear to be." "No shit," I said. He paused. "I'm a shifter." I crouched behind a rock. The only living being who had seen me naked since I had grown up was Ashton Mieris, if you considered him a living person. I'm sure Thomas would give me an argument on that. The end of Book 1. To Kill a Vampire. Book 2 coming soon and